Hey, what's up, viewer? Welcome to Day 4, Hour 5 of this Nebulous Live Development Creation Series. I meant to jump right back on after the last video and I wound up falling asleep. I kind of napped, so I haven't committed to calling this Day 5, so instead I'm going to try and bust out a couple of more hours on Day 4. Alright, so last time what I wound up doing was starting to add some extra UI for investing into a player's active selection that they have claimed, which at the beginning is just the player, it's just the player's capital. However, when I started to add the UI, it broke my other UI, so I'm gonna have to do something I've never really done before, and I'm just gonna have to figure out how to properly leverage the Flex system. Up until this point, I've been using the UI builder and just throwing things together. And at this point, though, it's going to have to be a little better than that. It should work pretty good if I can grasp the fundamentals of how the layout system works. So if I take a look real quick, I am choosing to use the UI toolkit, which models itself after web development, basically. And as I was sifting through the documentation, if I come down to this visual tree section, it winds up discussing coordinate and position under the coordinate and position system section. It says it's based on Flexbox. For more information, see the layout engine. So if I go to this, it talks about an even more specific version of positioning elements with the layout engine. It mentions that the layout engine uses the layout principles of something called Yoga, which is a subset of Flexbox, an HTML CSS layout system, and if you click on this Yoga official documentation, it actually brings up the documentation for the layout system. So what I'm going to have to do here, unfortunately, I was hoping to not have to absorb something like this. However, I'm going to have to, and it's integral to completing the game, so unfortunately studying how to do this is a piece of making this game. So even though what I'm doing is not building game stuff in Unity, I have to study this layout system in order to have a better idea of how to set up the UI without it going all over the place. So at this point, this is basically the entire purpose of this particular video, is I've got to study study this Yoga, excuse me. I have to study this Yoga layout documentation. And a lot of it looks like a lot of it is interactable. And I'm just going to have to run through this and see what it's got. Alright, so I'm not sure what component. I'm not interested in component kit, I really am just interested in Flex. So this is like web stuff for using component kit. That's not exactly what I'm interested in. I guess I'm just gonna have to go through all of these individually. Okay, so that I understand what relative means, and I understand what absolute means. This is I can offset Interesting. Okay, so I can use relative and then offset it by its top, left and right. I didn't realize that part. And this is just laid on top of everything else. Okay. So I didn't realize that. I did not realize that in particular, actually. And yes, I can see it's a little weird how that works, but okay. So I can actually adjust content by, so I can float in, it can flow using the relative system, and then I can make a micro adjustment. I didn't actually know that. Look at that. I can wrap items to multiple lines using FlexWrap. I didn't know that. Okay, so is this actually going to change anything, or? So flex start, center, flex end, stretch. And it just splits it in half, I guess. Okay. So a lot of that makes sense. Once again, these aren't so difficult. I don't usually have issues with the alignment properties. This stuff kind of makes sense. It, like, distributes the stuff relative to the size it's in. And then you can do custom alignment element by element. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Huh. Okay. So that's a little interesting. Okay. It only has the auto property. Okay. I guess that makes enough sense. So I did not realize I could do wrapping like this. Or I could expand an element. I could overflow a whole element into the next line. I did not realize that. This is all probably pretty straightforward. And if they reverse, they actually do reverse chronologically also. So I have to keep that in mind about the wrapping mode. Okay. Alright, so flex basis, axis independent, and I can provide a default size. So default size before any flex grow or flex shrink calculations are performed. Okay, so I can change its main axis size. Okay, and then I use these two, but I'm not sure actually what they do. So flex grow describes how any space within a container should be distributed among its children along the main axis. How any space within a container should be distributed among its children along the main axis. After laying out its children, a container will distribute any remaining space according to the flex grow values specified by its children. So it takes its children, lays them out, and after that, the flex grow values of its child elements will be dependent on how much the element is supposed to grow. Okay, so flex shrink, on the other hand, describes how to shrink children along the main axis in the case that the total size of the children overflow the size of the container on the main axis. Flex shrink is very similar to flex grow and can be thought of in the same way if any overflowing size is considered to be negative remaining space. These two properties also work well together by allowing children to grow and shrink as needed. Flex shrink accepts any floating point value greater than 0, greater than or equal to 0, with 1 being the default value. A container will shrink its children weighted by the child's flex shrink. Okay, so what happens if I change this to like 1? I don't see any difference. If I change its shrink to 0, still no different. I don't see any difference there either. What if I change this to something else? Okay, so I guess what does that mean? That itself fills up all of the remaining space or something? So like, in the event I say 0.5, it takes up half the remaining space. So in that event, if I say 1 here, and then come over here, and I say like 0.5, does that actually mean this will shrink? I guess not. What if I said this to 0.5? Yeah, see, I just don't know. Fundamentally speaking. So we're looking at, so I'm not sure about the shrink thing, so let's see if this is like, this can't go over 1. Can it? Okay, so now it's taking in a part of it. And if I change it back to 1, do they even out? No kidding, so I can put this at like 5 or something. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Looks like it's diminishing though at that point. It almost looks like it's getting... That's kind of weird. It's kind of weird. Huh. Okay, so this is 1 and this is 1. Oh, but let's set this back to 1. What if I like put this to 0? Yeah, I'm just not sure if, how flex shrink is supposed to work in this instance. I'm actually not sure what to write here. Okay, so if they're all set to grow 1, they will in fact fill all of the space available, changing their size while they're at it. And then if like this one's at 0 and this one's at 0, then I suppose I see where this is filling it up. So what if this is at 0.5? Does it... So I can grow certain elements to take up the rest of the space. And I was under the impression that if I go like this, I should be able to lower that size. However, it's not choosing to get any lower than, I guess it's some kind of hard-coded value. Or something. If I... Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but... Okay, so flex grow makes sense, I suppose. It actually can... You can use the element to just automatically take up remaining space. And I suppose that is sensical to an extent. However, it winds up kind of, it relies on surrounding elements to determine its final size, so it's not like and it's almost like it should be this simple. You just plug in a bunch of elements and you flex them. To take up to automatically take up size, or to automatically take up empty space without having to make any manual adjustments at all, basically. Just a little bit of conceptualization about flex. Oh, so I can change the size of these items. So the flex basis of an item is the default size of that item, the size of the item before any flex, ground, and flex string calculations are performed. So these are going with auto, so can I change this to like 100 or something? It's not happy when I try to change the root element. But what if I tried to change the default size of this element? And this is the size before flexing. It's not changing any of its values anyway. Okay. So I'm not sure about that one. Alright, so let's see here. As for justifying content, I feel like I've basically looked at this already, but yeah, I mean, this is pretty straightforward here. So I could do a space around, and then theoretically I could increase their flex values, and they can fill the space up or something like that. Like, that one makes sense. Layout direction. Okay, so that just has to do with okay. Margins, paddings, and borders, these make sense. So margin is outside, padding is inside. Okay, so border and padding are slightly different, but they're pretty similar. Okay, so percentage of the parent size. So there's like a hard-coded max value or whatever. Okay, so that one's... Okay, so you kind of see it. So if I set this to 0, it actually goes to 0. If I set it's like 300, it doesn't have to go that high. However, minimum width, it will go up to 300. And it will go up to 400 or whatever. Okay. So I can hardcode a minimum width of the percentage of something. And it will override everything else. So something's getting too large, I can actually scale down its maximum size, and then it should in fact scale itself down, and elements it's in will adjust properly, and then if the flex is at 0, then it won't try to fill in any extra space and stuff like that, so I guess that makes some sense. That was relatively enlightening, and then let's see the width and height. So an auto width and height is actually based off of text size, or image size, or children. So an auto width and height could theoretically it should theoretically just contain itself around its children. And then I can also set its width and height to be a percentage of its parent. Which is really what I would want. I just want to say that this thing is like like a third of the whole screen or whatever, basically. It would be something that would be interesting. So 200. And it does go up there. So that's a little weird. I'm not sure about that one, that's kind of strange. Okay, so I set the width of this to 600. Now it is changing, that's the size of this thing. 800, 600, and it should in fact be maxed out. But if I say 6,000, it starts to squeeze stuff, so that's kind of weird. Can I say percentage? So 50%. Okay, so if I have like a 1920 1080, this thing could feasibly be set up with all this stuff going on. Okay, so I'm not trying to use it like this. So it's not too complicated. And this has all this stuff in here. Doesn't really seem like a quote-unquote text whatchamajig though. What did it call it? Flexible text? Yeah, I don't know where it's going with that, but so this just has an absolute position. These have relative positions. Aspect ratio, automatic. Okay, so it looks like I'm going to have to so is an overlay an absolute? Transparency is handled elsewhere, I suppose, but okay. Alright, so it looks like I'm going to have to actually play around in here. And I'm going to have to change the width and height of this to 1920 by 1080. And zoom out on it. And then I'm going to have to, it'd be cool if this would zoom down so I could take a bigger look here. So I need to add some child elements. So basically, like, if I add a child, I want that child to be really what I want is for it to be 100% of the width. And I want the height to be automatic. But I guess I could hard code it in to say like what, 25% of the height? That's even too much, maybe 15%. 20%. And now I just have to align it at the bottom, which is not working. But align self to flex end. Okay. Next is the idea that inside of here we need a couple things. I wonder if there's a way. I guess I can't name it, can I? So basically, I need this bad boy to be aligned to flex start along the cross axis. If I click center, so it centers up and down like that, and then does this do anything, or that's dealing with something else? Justify content. I guess it's align center. Okay, so I'm just not sure. I guess essentially we're looking at like aligning this to the center. So you justify center. It's just weird because this is like I want this in the center like this, but I might not want to center everything, basically. It's also a little big for this, but okay, so let's try. Now we're adding another child. And I've managed to jack up the alignment. So now I want that at the top. It's not managing to override properly. Because this fella I want kind of like this. Because here it's road. I guess I'm columning it though, aren't I? And let's see here, real quick. If I grow this, oops. If I grow this, and I grow this, it will share the growth there without making this any larger. So now I'm just looking at aligning it, and it all is centered. I guess because they align themselves, it's so I need to auto this and auto this. And now I've got an element in need of a bunch of child elements, and I still am just not. I don't know why, but over the years, for me personally, it's been notorious that I haven't been able to. For some reason, my brain just doesn't wrap itself around UI layout stuff. A part of me always just wants to like write the element and say this element is a certain percentage of the screen, as opposed to trying to use any kind of layout system, and then you can just micro percentile the which I suppose the whole idea though is Flex is supposed to like help that or something. Okay, so now essentially the issue is that if I start adding new children, it's just created an issue because now it's columned, but these 4 need to be in a row. So if I go up here and I change this to row, number 1 needs to like align itself to the start automatically. That just doesn't work like I want it to. So the only thing here I could imagine would be this definitely has to have column, but then number 2 has to actually have its own elements, more or less. And then oops, it's growing even further now. And effectively what's going on is these elements which are now justified in this way, essentially you have to, let me see here. So I set this to 1, there's no empty space to grow into. So that doesn't matter, but it does have and this is going to be of the parent. So you can just come in here and set a percentage, because the percentage is just going to be capped, basically. Which is really making me want to avoid using the layout system at all, kind of, actually. Which I understand that it might be useful for responsiveness, but I'm getting a different idea. And that direction is to have a root that is, of course, the size. Followed by just adding absolute elements. And it's not actually, oh wait, let me select it. So absolute element. I think this is like, what, 16 by 9 or 16 by 10 or something? A little bit of auto though. And here's an issue, is that this actually has no way for me to pick. This actually has no way for me to pick a size. Or it doesn't have a way for me to choose a starting and ending point properly without using these values, I guess. Oh, there's a position. Okay, so what happens if I say 25 here? Oh, that's pretty cool how it... It's actually pretty cool how it gives you the number there. So we go 250, 250. Oh. Okay, so now I guess okay, I guess kind of what I'm thinking is I could do like something like 75% and then something like 85% and then something like 45%, 55%. Whoops. Which is not, for some reason, it's not correct here. I wonder why that's being weird. I wonder if it's broken or something. 46%? Oh, it doesn't look like it's actually taking percentage in. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. What if I say 50%, 50%? Okay, it looks like I'm not understanding this. Maybe it's aspect ratio. 16 by 9 or whatever. So it doesn't matter. What if I change the width to 50? Okay, so let's change the width to 10%. And then set it to 45%, 55%. Okay. And it would wind up having to be the same thing for the height, of course, 10%. And then it is effectively a way to always percentilely recalculate the screen regardless of aspect ratio, or regardless of hard size. It'll always just be 10% of every screen or whatever. Which is why accounting for like 25 different screens is just brutal. Or not screens, but like for different resolutions. It's funky. Alright, so it seems a little too big width-wise. Let's... I guess then we'd have to come up here and we're gonna have to try 5%. And then you're looking at 57.5% to... or wait, hold on. 47.5% to 52.5%. Alright, so now I have a number that's not actually scaling by a text value. So for this to work, I would have to like pre-map everything out. And I can see where then you're getting into like micro-adjusting dozens and dozens of elements. Even though it's exact, it'll be exactly positioned. I suppose the layout system helps with changing the size. Or it allows you to change the size and then let the position change itself. Alright. I might need to come back to this at some point, but I guess there was one other thing I was... Okay, flex base. What was this again? Default size before any flexing is done. Doesn't actually change anything. So yeah, I'm not sure about... I'm still not quite sure what this is, but okay, whatever. Alright, so this video is closing in on getting done pretty soon. Sorry that it wasn't a video about making anything in the game, but I've got to get this layout stuff correct. And unfortunately it looks better in here than it does in the game mode, but I'm just going to have to reconsider this whole thing. It's all functional. Alright, so I guess essentially I'm going to have to keep in mind that growing only grows into the parent, it doesn't expand the parent. Expanding the parent would require the minimum width and height, or the raw width and height, to be adjusted. But if those are going off of percentage, then I guess essentially everything inside of an element, if the element is set to a percentage of its parent, then you can essentially fill up the parent to 100% by using the percentages. And that will remove having to micro adjust the width and the positions. And by keeping the flex grow off, it will remove weird instances where the elements stretch just because fellow siblings stretch the parent container. And then it can retain its own size based off some percentage of the parent element. And as long as those percentages sum up to 100%, all of the space can be accounted for. And I should be able to more particularly get this UI to work. Alright, so thanks for taking a look at this video. I'm going to cut it here for now. When I come back in the next video, this is essentially what's going to be happening, is I'm going to be diving into this and tweaking all the values to get the UI looking properly. So if you've watched it to this point, I really appreciate it. I'll see you at the next one. Take care.